Hello, and welcome to the Argyle IT Solutions Expo, navigating cutting edge IT solutions. My name is Nick with Argyle, and it's great to have everyone joining us today. A couple of notes before I turn things over to our esteemed speaker. First, a quick reminder to stop by our sponsors' virtual booths at any time during today's event and for the following week. Our partners are committed to providing you with valuable content and a great overall experience. At any time during today's event, you can visit their virtual booths from the main agenda page, which include complimentary materials, information, and meet and greet opportunities. To ask questions throughout the session, simply type into the Q&A chat and we will address your questions at the end of the session. Also, be sure to subscribe to Argyle on YouTube for exclusive access to all our past events. Now, without further delay, I would like to introduce our speaker, Chris Hoff, Senior Product Marketing Manager, Cohesity. We're super excited to have Chris with us for a thought leadership presentation titled Recovery Without Regret, Automate, Orchestrate, and Recover with Confidence. Welcome, Chris. Over to you.
Thanks, Nick. It's great to be here. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today. So there's an old joke in IT about the weakest link in technology being layer 8 of the OSI model, right? It's humans, and it's true to an extent. But what's interesting is, as humans, we're conditioned, or we're really good at dealing with tangible threats, right? You know, I see a lion charging at me. I'm either going to run away or I'm going to fight and hope for the best. But intangible threats, such as cyber threats, are something that a lot of people struggle with. And so, if you're good at cybersecurity, if you're good at recognizing cyber threats, you're actually more advanced than many other people, many other human beings. And I point that out because there's two sides of that coin, right? So there's this idea within psychology of exposure therapy. I'm not a fan of snakes. So if I were to want to get over my fear of snakes, I would go and I would get therapy, and they would maybe show me a picture of a snake, and we talk about snakes, and maybe I'd be in the same room as a snake, and maybe I'd go touch the snake, and then maybe I'd end up holding the snake. And at that point, in theory, I'm over my fear of snakes. But this actually works the other direction too. And it's becoming a larger problem within the cybersecurity and the IT space, because we are so overwhelmed with news about cyber threats, about cyber attacks. It's just never ending. And so a lot of folks that I talk to are getting numb to the idea of the risks that we're dealing with within cybersecurity. And I find myself doing it too, right? You see, we just had a major cyber attack over in Europe for the airline ticketing systems. Which, by the way, my good friend James Blake wrote a blog about, because he was stuck in the middle of it. And you can go over and you can see it on cohesity.com. But the point is that, I read the articles and I said, oh, okay, it's another cyber attack. It's just ransomware. And this idea that it's just ransomware, it's just another attack, is putting us at risk. And so because of that, we're making assumptions about how we can respond to those threats. And these are actually my 4 favorite comments that people have actually said to me about cyber threats, right? It's not as bad as they say, right? Everybody's being hyperbolic. It won't happen to me, right? Classic denial. I'm a better, right? It's that whole, I'm a better driver than everyone else. Why is everybody so bad at driving? I'm great. I actually had somebody, and this is my favorite, somebody actually said to me at one point that I'm smarter than the bad guys. And in this person's case, it was probably true. But when you consider the fact that the bad guys have an unlimited amount of time and an unlimited number of tries to get a successful attack, and they only have to be right once, whereas the defender, as smart as he is, has to be right 100% of the time. The playing field is a little bit off, and that leads us to, it's fine. I've got a plan, right? Don't worry about it. But these plans, because we're getting numb to the idea of these attacks, I'm seeing them have more and more assumptions built into them. And so these assumptions and these misunderstandings, if you will, of what's happening in the threat is putting us at larger risk. And so let me give you an example. Let me go the right direction. So when we think about cyber attacks and the cost of a cyber attack, there's this belief that the cost of the attack is the ransom and the investigation and all of that. But the reality is that 80% of the cost of a cyber attack comes from downtime. It comes from lost revenue, lost ability to do business. So if we look at that, I grabbed the cost information from Sophos's latest cyber threat report. The cost of a cyber attack in 2025, according to them, minus the cost of ransom, is about $1.5 million, $1.53 million. Now, the good news is that this is down 44% from last year. So we're getting better. We're getting better at this. But if we extrapolate that out, then the cost of revenue is about $1.2 million, right? This is business that we're not able to do. And if you talk to any salespeople, the idea of not being able to close a sale is just unthinkable to them. But it also means in this example that the cost of the actual recovery is about $306,000. And when you think about it like this, the point is that the underlying costs of the investigation and all of those technical things that we need to do to get back up and running it makes that incident response retainer seem pretty reasonable. And I point this out not as fear mongering, but to kind of reset the way that we're thinking about our response to attacks, because I'm seeing a lot of folks treating cyber attacks in the same way as they're treating standard disaster recovery. And I say standard because fires, floods, and hurricanes and tornadoes and all of those things, the recovery technically from one of these is pretty straightforward. We walk into a room and it's dark. We've probably had a power outage. We walk in and our feet get wet. There's probably a flood, right? We know what the problem is, so we can respond to it in kind. And it's a pretty straight path between problem and solution. In cyber recovery world, we've got a lot of extra steps, and this is just what I could fit on the slide. This doesn't take into account the lawyers and regulators and all the other stuff that we have to do. But the point is that because we're treating still in 2025, we're treating cyber attacks as the same way as disaster recovery. We're slowing ourselves down from that actual recovery, which in turn is obviously costing us more money. Why is this? Why are we dealing with this? Well, we're dealing with a lot of fragmented tools, and this has been a problem for probably decades now. But the amount of copying and pasting that I see during incident response engagements that I still get to be privy to is pretty substantial. And this is making it obviously take far too long to recover. We're not testing what we need to test. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of organizations out there that are saying that they're testing on a weekly or a biweekly basis to make sure that they can recover. because recovery is not the same as backup. But they're testing the easy workloads, not the mission critical workloads. And so when the cyber attack happens and we're under stress and we're dealing with, lack of sleep and bad pizza, we can't get up and running, right? And so we'll talk about this. The other thing that we're dealing with is a lack of preparation. And so this actually wasn't part of my initial presentation, but it's becoming more and more relevant that we need to get back, or more and more obvious that we need to get back to basics. And so if you're not familiar with the gold standard 3-2-1 rule of data security, it is about having 3 copies of your data on 2 different types of media, one of which is offsite or immutable or air gapped. And you'll see a lot of extra numbers after the one, right? 3-2-1 plus, 3-2-1-1, et cetera. But at its core, we need to get back to this idea of the 3-2-1 rule. And this is, if you're not aware, this has been a rule that's been around for decades, right? Back in the olden days, we were talking about tapes and removable hard disks. And you handed one of those to a driver who took the tape off to a building someplace else, and when you needed it back, you made a phone call and they drove it back to you and you restored it. In modern world, that one copy that's stored off-site is part of what I'm going to refer to as a cyber vault, and where this fits into this talk is that moving that data off to a cyber vault needs to be an automated process. And so the core tenets of a cyber vault is that it is isolated, right? It's air gapped. It's immutable. It's got separate access controls, right? We're not using our AD or Entra ID credentials. We're using some other set of credentials. Hopefully MFA is turned on. Hopefully quorum is turned on so that more than one person has to be involved with any kind of decision making. But the point is that having this copy of data automatically sent off site is going to ensure that you've got something to recover in the worst case scenario. And the response might be that, well, I've got the backups and they're immutable, and that's great. But unfortunately, the attackers are doing everything that they can to make sure that your only choice is to give them money. So they're going after your backups. And for them, it's essentially an ROI calculation, right? So what do I need to do to make sure that I get paid? And so they're going to destroy your backup infrastructure. They're going to destroy your data security. So that's your only choice, is to give the money. Having a copy of data that's automatically sent off site is going to give you that chance to get back up and running without having to pay the ransom. The other use case for a cyber vault is what I like to call a digital jump bag. And so when we're preparing for a cyber attack, the idea of having all of the tools and resources and software that we need in order to respond and recover to that attack can be available to us and can be protected from the attackers. And this is something that we can use our cyber vaults for, as well as our core data. But the idea here that we're going through this process is key to the actual recovery. Making sure that we've got the tools that we need is important. Now, how do we automate this? What do we recommend? Well, and this is about as product-y as I'm going to get. But in our world, you'll hear us talk about having blueprints for recovery. And you might hear, in if you're talking about the SOAR world, security automation orchestration, they'll talk about blueprints or run books. But the idea here is to be able to build out a consistent process that you can use in order to do your testing, do your recovery. There are four main use cases for this: ransomware recovery, obviously, but also disaster recovery, making sure that we can test to prove that our most critical workloads are going to come back. Interestingly, compliance is becoming a bigger and bigger issue around recovery testing. And so whether it's your insurer or it's the regulations that you need to comply with, more and more people are being asked to prove that the data is there and the security processes that have been put in place are actually going to work. And we're seeing that too within the incident response space, right? In incident preparedness. Back in the olden days, we'd go through a tabletop exercise and we'd run through the threat, and at the very end we'd say, okay, now backup Bob is gonna recover the data. We'd check the box and we'd go to lunch. These days, we're being asked more and more to prove that the recovery can happen. So how do we make sure that this is actually possible? Well, having an automated, validated, consistent blueprint is going to be a big part of that, and running tests on our most critical data is going to be key. And when I talk about critical data, a lot of folks, if you're a software developer, you might think about your software development tools, your control systems for that. If you're a hospital, you might think about patient data, which is absolutely true. For the software company, though, and really many companies, the two most critical systems are the customer management system and the accounting system, because if we can't take orders and we can't record the revenue, the business isn't running. And so what I'm saying is we need to have a blueprint that allows us to test that recovery and do it in a way that happens regularly and consistently. So, being able to do this on a consistent basis means that I can have most of my blueprint be the same, right? I'm gonna run the rehearsal. I'm gonna maybe do a malware scan. I'm gonna spin up the application to make sure that it works, right? And then tear it back down after it's over, after the testing is over. And in that case, and I know I'm oversimplifying it, but in that case, all I'm doing is changing the workload that I'm starting to recover. And so by doing this, one of the things that we're also doing is we're proving what our RTOs are. And why this is important is a number of here over and over is that organizations will say, I've got a recovery time objective of 1 hour for this super complex mission critical application. And that arbitrary 1 hour turns out to not be reality because it's a super complex application. And in some cases, there's physics involved of the actual physics of data transfer that can't meet that requirement. By doing this testing on a regular automated basis, we can create realistic RTOs, and because we can document it. It means that the arbitrary numbers that get thrown around are frankly proven incorrect. The other thing that we can do, I mentioned this earlier about scanning for malware, right? There's within our testing, there's a use case around essentially threat hunting. And so if you don't already have an active threat hunting program, in your organization, this is a way to get started. And so by being able to do that threat scan within the testing, we're able to more clearly see latent threats or dormant threats that that are sitting in our environment that maybe haven't triggered yet. And to be fair, the dwell time is getting shorter and shorter because the threat actors are getting more efficient. But the point is that we can use our backup data as a threat hunting mechanism and not have to worry about the impacts to production. A lot of threat hunting programs can get very complex, and one of the main concerns is that they're hunting through production systems. They don't want to take away the CPU cycles, the memory, etc., from production and slow the business down. We even see this with vulnerability scanning. Cohesity happens to have a integration with Tenable, so you can use your backup data to scan for vulnerabilities. If we add this into a blueprint, now we can spin this workload up. We can gain a lot of information and push this information out into production so that we can respond faster. We can speed up our patching process, or at least speed up the process to gain insight into what the vulnerabilities are, so that we can make decisions more efficiently. And this is also there's a use case in here for disaster recovery as well. Having these automated tests mean that if we've got that secondary site, are we sure that we're going to be able to recover to it, right? There's a lot of different simplistic ways that we can use automation to make sure that we're going to recover. And I use the word simplistic somewhat carefully, because these are the things that get us in trouble, right? It's the assumptions that get us in trouble. The other thing that having an automated workflow allows us to do is discover the assumptions that we're making. So often I hear during a tabletop exercise, well, it should work like this, or backup Bob does that. Murphy's Law says that it's not going to work like that, and backup Bob's going to be on vacation when the disaster strikes. So by being able to identify the assumptions that we're making allows us to close those gaps, which of course lowers our response time, lowers costs, and gets us back up and running faster. Now, this is not to say that automation is a panacea for all of our problems. We've seen this in the SOAR world. We've seen this time and time again, that there still needs to be human intervention in the cycle. And the value here in getting as much automated as we can is freeing up the time for the operator, so that they can go do more important things, more business value, right? And also by being able to free up that time, we're able to more clearly focus on the alerts that come in, right? So if something anomalous happens during a test, if I'm the operator, I want to know about it. I don't want to run the entire test, but I can more clearly respond, or more logically respond to that issue if I'm not having to do 10 other things along with it. So the point is that while we're automating as much as possible, and a friend of mine used to refer to it as administration by laziness. which I've always loved. While we're automating as much as possible, the response that we have on the human level becomes more targeted and becomes more prescriptive, and so we're able to better understand what's going on and make better decisions. In our world, being able to having these automation capabilities as part of your overall data security structure means that we're now using backup data in novel ways, and we're seeing a lot of folks starting to get these processes in place because they're realizing that they've essentially got a copy of their entire company sitting in the backup someplace. So let's use that data. Let's use it as a resource and not just something that's taking up disk space and in the data center or costing us money out in the cloud. And so all of this together is allowing us to be more efficient and be more proactive when it comes to the security threats. The other thing that is interesting about this and kind of our overall viewpoint of the data security world is that this allows us to respond and recover once, as opposed to realizing that we put a piece of malware back into the environment and having to start all over again. And that might seem a little bit strange. I would never do that. But the attack that we're seeing going on right now over in Europe at the airports, it's been reported on social media that that's exactly what they're dealing with. And the reason that they're dealing with that, or one of the reasons that they're dealing with that, I should say, is that they are not understanding the full scope of the attack, right? I'm making an assumption here, but maybe they're buying into the idea that all I have to do is scan my backups with my malware scanner. It comes back clean and I'm fine. And that might be true, but we know the way that modern attacks work, modern ransomware, whatever you want to call it, is that the system that is impacted, the system that in this case might be encrypted, is not where the attackers are living. There's an entire command and control infrastructure sitting out someplace on a system that's not impacted, and they're just waiting for you to recover so that they can hit you again. And as a matter of fact, we have a report coming out in the next week or so that we did some research that shows the number of folks that are being getting asked for a ransom multiple times is actually increasing. So understanding where the threat is coming from by doing this automated testing gives us the ability to patch those vulnerabilities and stop or close the gap, if you will, close the door to the attacker. Looking at this a different way, we talk about, I mentioned preparation. I mentioned that idea of the digital jump bag, right? The idea of testing and making sure that we've got that copy of data. It means that we are prepared when there's an attack coming in. If we're prepared, we've got the tools in place so that we can initiate what I like to call a minimum viable response capability, right? The clean room, if you will, so that we can do a proper investigation. And when I say proper investigation, this is something that's been happening for years, but it's been happening on the incident responder's laptop. Maybe they've spun up VirtualBox or VMware client or what have you to do an investigation one workload at a time. By being able to use an automated workflow to spin up an entire entire system, entire application, gives us the ability to do a more thorough investigation. And we've partnered with some of the leading incident responders so that they are using our backup data. They're using the backup data of our customers to do an investigation. It's speeding up the process, making it more efficient. It's also reducing that risk of reintroducing malware into the environment, because now we're able to see, among other things, the location of the attackers. And another integration that we have that helps with things like this is we integrate with Cisco XDR, among others. But Cisco XDR just detects something that is suspicious. Here's a suspicious item on a machine, tells Cohesity Data Protect to grab a snapshot of that system. Now I've got a snapshot in real time that I can do an investigation on, without the attacker knowing about it. I'm doing it out of band. So having that automatic integration allows us to make sure that the attacker can't watch what we're doing. And I mentioned earlier about the integration with Tenable, right? We know where the vulnerabilities are. We've seen where the attacker lives. We can close those. We can make sure that the attacker is kicked out and won't be able to get back in. But it's doing it in a way that allows IT and security to work together. And if this is all sounding very familiar, it should, because this is all based on the NIST cybersecurity framework. And you can replace NIST with any of the other regular frameworks that are out there, but they'll use generally the same nomenclature. But the point is that this isn't just something that we came up with on our own. This is something that we're allowing, or that we're working with the existing frameworks in order to make sure that you can be more secure. So what is the outcome of this? Right, obviously reducing manual steps, right? That administration through laziness. Which is a term that I've always loved. We're shortening recovery time, right? We're improving our audit readiness, right? If I can just hand an auditor a report that says exactly what they need, I just saved myself a lot of time and hassle. And of course, I'm lowering the risk of infection, because if I can build a workflow that is doing some threat hunting for me, then I'll be able to be more proactive in my security stance. And this is this is important as organizations try to mature their security programs without taking on more cost, right? That whole idea of doing more with less. It allows us to be a little bit more efficient. So my big takeaways from this is really around, look at your plan. Be ready to start from scorched earth, right? Ground zero. You've lost everything. Now what are you going to do? Removing those assumptions, which hurts everyone. If you haven't done it already, identify those critical assets. What is the one or two applications that you just simply can't live without? And coordinate, if you're not doing this already, and I hope that you are, coordinate with the cybersecurity folks. If you're on the infrastructure and the backup side, because we're all better when we work together. And from a backup perspective, it's not just about having that backup. It's about having the most recent version of that backup, right? Having historical data that we can go back and look at, so that we can understand what changes have happened over time. And test. Can't stress this enough, right? Take those workloads, make sure that they come back, right. So that when the recovery is finished, that the application actually works. And that might seem a little bit of a strange thing to say, because of course it's going to work, but we've seen with the more complex applications that if the pieces aren't brought up in the right order, now you're going back and doing some troubleshooting, right? If the database comes up after the front end, they may not connect right, that type of thing. So making sure that all of that is happening allows us to have a real world RTO that we can take to the business with data that proves that we're not just pulling numbers out of the air. And all of this is designed to make sure that you've got that confidence that when the worst thing is going to happen, we're going to be okay. And that's the goal. So, automate where you can. Automate the things that even seem a little bit scary. And automate where you're making your assumptions. So with that, I'm gonna turn it over. There's been a number of questions that have been coming in. So Nick, I've seen some questions popping in. So why don't we take a few minutes and see what people are asking?
Yeah, great. Here's a good one from the audience. Is there such a thing as too much automation in the security process? What would you consider the best balance between human intervention versus automation?
That's actually a really good question, especially since I just said automate everything. There, how do I want to answer this? Automate where you can. Automate. Experiment with automation, right? See if it makes sense for you. There are going to be times when it just doesn't make sense. And I don't mean from a technology perspective. I mean from the business perspective. So, the balance is making sure that your business processes are aligning to the technology that you're implementing, which might sound a little bit trite, but the idea that we're automating the processes that drive the business is going to allow us to figure out where that balance is. But it is going to be a little bit of a give and take, a little bit of a testing scenario.
Okay, great. Here's another question. How do automated recovery workflows differ from traditional recovery methods? And what impact do they have on speed and reliability?
Oh, that's a good question. So the automation allows us to make sure that the recovery is going to work the first time. I mentioned about the more complex applications. If we're trying to bring up an application that has multiple moving parts, we need to do that in the right order. And unfortunately, what we see is that correct order isn't figured out until it's crunch time. And so by having an automated workflow in place allows us to prove what the right order is, and allows us to document that, so that now we have, again, another tangible business process that we can go through.
Great. Here's another good one. Why is rehearsing and validating recovery plans so critical? And what are some best practices for doing it effectively?
Wow, that could be an entire half hour into itself. But best practices, I mentioned about testing your critical workloads. What is most, not what you think the most critical workloads are, but what the business as a whole thinks the most critical workloads are. Testing those is going to save a lot of time and money for the business. So that would be my number one best practice. Number two is kind of getting back to basics, right? I mentioned the 3-2-1 rule. I mentioned about having those processes automated as well. Those are the things that seem simplistic, but they're the things that are going to save the business in the long run.
All right. And can you share examples of how reducing manual steps has made a real difference in accelerating recovery after an incident?
Absolutely. So just this week, I mentioned at the cyber attacks within the EU airports. They're, like I said before, they're recovering malware back into their environment, and so the more times that you have to do that, obviously, the longer it takes. We had a customer that one of my colleagues was working with a year or two ago. They had to recover because of that same issue between 10 and 15 times. And so if you think about the amount of time it takes to do a recovery, that's a crazy amount of downtime that the company is dealing with. So making sure that you're looking at the bigger picture of the attack and not just the symptom, right? The encrypted system is going to be amazingly important for not putting malware, not allowing the attackers back into the environment.
Great. And I think we can squeeze in one more question. What advice would you give to teams that are just beginning to modernize their disaster recovery playbooks?
Ooh, good question. I'm going to beat a dead horse. Test. We in technology tend to make a lot of assumptions about the business without actually talking to the business. And I think we're getting, over the years, we've gotten better at it. But having that multidisciplinary team to figure out what the plan should be is incredibly important. And that includes not just executive leadership, not just the IT folks or the security folks. That includes folks like HR. That includes the legal department, right? It could include marketing and communications. We're seeing cyber attacks where the phone system is taken down. Reporters are trying to call in and get information. They can't get in contact with anybody, so they start making their own assumptions about the cyber attack. Legal gets involved and is often surprised when they find out how some of these processes are running. Then they don't align with what the business needs to do. So getting all of those folks who you wouldn't normally think about involved in the recovery and the overall cyber response process is going to help the entire business in the long run.
Great. And thank you again, Chris, for such an incredible thought leadership. And I want to thank everyone else for joining us today. This session, along with all of today's content, will be available on demand following the event. Our next session will begin at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time, which will be a keynote presentation titled Tech Debt Takedown, a blueprint for modernizing legacy systems. Please click the join button that will appear on your screen to be redirected to the next session, and we look forward to seeing you there.